Welcome to this chilling episode brought to you by Vault of 15, your #1 top 15 list maker. Today we uncover the most shocking murder cases of the past 150 years. Stories of love, betrayal, jealousy, and rage that ended in tragedy. Some of these crimes were solved with punishments delivered. Others remain unsolved mysteries that still haunt investigators and historians to this day. Join us as we count down 15 of the most infamous murder cases in history. Number 15. Lizzie Borden Murders, 1892, USA. On August 4th, 1892, Andrew and Abby Borden were found butchered inside their Fall River, Massachusetts home. Andrew lay on the parlor sofa, his face hacked almost beyond recognition, while Abby was discovered upstairs in the guest room, her skull split open. Their daughter Lizzie, 32 years old at the time, quickly became the prime suspect. She had a difficult relationship with her stepmother, was resentful of her father's strict control of the family fortune, and had allegedly tried to buy poison days before the killings. Still, the evidence was weak, no bloodstains on her clothing, and no murder weapon ever conclusively tied to her. Lizzie was arrested and stood trial in 1893. The jury acquitted her after just 90 minutes of deliberation. She was never punished and lived out her days in Fall River, wealthy but shunned by society. She died in 1927, age 66. Despite her acquittal, the case remains one of the most infamous examples of possible justice denied. Number 14. The murder of Kitty Genovese, 1964, USA. At around 3 a.m. on March the 13th, 1964, 28-year-old Kitty Genovese returned home to her apartment in Queens, New York. In the dark street, she was attacked by Winston Mosley, a married man and father of two. He stabbed her once, fled when she screamed, and returned minutes later to stab her again. Neighbors later admitted to hearing or seeing fragments of the assault, but none intervened until it was too late. Mosley was arrested a few days later after being caught during a burglary. He confessed to Kitty's murder as well as other rapes and killings. At trial, he was convicted and sentenced to death. His sentence was later reduced to life imprisonment after appeals. Mosley remained incarcerated in New York prisons for the rest of his life, becoming one of the longest-serving inmates in the state. He died in 2016 at the age of 81. Kitty's tragic death became a symbol not only of violent crime, but also of public indifference, though the story of dozens of silent witnesses was exaggerated. The horror of her fate was very real. Number 13. The murder of Nell Cropsey, 1901, USA. 19-year-old Nell Cropsey disappeared on November 20th, 1901, after stepping onto her porch with her suitor Jim Wilcox in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. When she didn't return inside, her family grew alarmed. A month later, on Christmas Eve, her body was discovered floating in the Pasquotank River, just a few hundred yards from her home. Wilcox was the last to see her alive, and suspicion fell squarely on him. Despite his insistence that he had left her unharmed, the evidence was circumstantial but compelling enough for a jury. He was convicted of second-degree murder in 1903 and sentenced to 30 years in prison. After serving 15 years, the governor granted him a pardon. Wilcox never confessed and lived quietly until his death in 1934. Nell's murder left her family broken, and the case remains a chilling reminder of small-town justice. A man punished but never proven guilty beyond doubt, and a young woman whose fate remains clouded in mystery. Number 12. The Hall Mills Murders, 1922, USA. On a September night in 1922, the bodies of Reverend Edward Hall and Eleanor Mills, a choir singer from his congregation, were discovered under a crab apple tree in New Jersey. Both had been shot in the head, and Eleanor's throat was slit so deeply she was nearly decapitated. Scattered love letters between the two made the affair undeniable. Suspicion quickly turned to Hall's wife, Frances, and her wealthy brothers. They were rumored to have caught the pair in the act and silenced them in a crime of passion. The trial in 1926 was sensational, filling newspapers with scandalous tales of adultery, jealousy, and privilege. Yet the evidence was weak. The crime scene had been trampled by curiosity seekers, and key testimony relied on a witness whose credibility was shaky. Frances Hall and her brothers were acquitted. No one else was ever charged. Frances lived quietly until her death in 1941, always under the shadow of suspicion. The case remains one of the most infamous unsolved double murders in American history, remembered for its mix of lust, betrayal, and the failure of justice. Number 11. The murder of Mary Fagan, 1913, USA. On April 26, 1913, 13-year-old Mary Fagan went to pick up her paycheck at the National Pencil Company in Atlanta, Georgia. Hours later, her lifeless body was found in the basement. She had been beaten, strangled with a cord, and assaulted. The factory superintendent, Leo Frank, a well-educated Jewish man from New York, was arrested. The key testimony against him came from Jim Conley, a janitor with a criminal past, who claimed Frank ordered him to help cover up the murder. Despite contradictions in Conley's story, an all-white, all-male jury convicted Frank. He was sentenced to death. Amid rising doubts, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment by the governor, who believed Frank innocent. That decision sparked outrage. In 1915, a mob abducted Frank from prison and lynched him near Marietta, Georgia. Decades later, evidence suggested Conley may have been the true killer. Frank was posthumously pardoned in 1986, but the stain of mob justice remains. Number 10. The Axemen of New Orleans, 1918 to 1919, USA. Between 1918 and 1918, terror swept through New Orleans as an unidentified intruder slipped into homes at night, attacking victims with their own axes or straight razors. He targeted Italian-American grocers and their families, killing at least 6 and injuring many more. The most infamous moment came when a letter, allegedly from the Axeman himself, was published in newspapers. In it, the writer declared he would strike again, but would spare any house where jazz music was playing. On the designated night, the city pulsed with music as people filled dance halls, hoping to keep the killer away. No murders occurred. Despite investigations and arrests of innocent men, the true Axeman was never identified. The killings stopped as suddenly as they began. No one was convicted, and the case faded into legend. The Axeman's eerie letter, signed "A Demon from the Hottest Hell," left a permanent scar on the city's folklore. Number 9. The Cleveland Torso Murders, 1930s USA. In the 1930s, Cleveland's Kingsbury Run district was gripped by fear. A killer stalked the homeless and vulnerable, mutilating and decapitating at least a dozen victims. Bodies were left in public places, riverbanks, empty lots, even in plain sight of city workers. The brutality earned the murderer the nickname, the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. Elliot Ness, the famed lawman who helped bring down Al Capone, took charge of the investigation. Despite raids and interrogations, the case went unsolved. Ness had a suspect, a doctor with disturbing tendencies, but there was never enough evidence to charge him. No convictions were ever made. The killing stopped around 1938, leaving the city shaken and the mystery unsolved. Ness's reputation suffered for his failure, and the Torso Killer remains one of America's most chilling unidentified murderers. Number 8. The Greenbrier Ghost, 1897 USA. In rural West Virginia, 23-year-old Zona Heaster was found dead in her home. Her husband, Erasmus Trout Shue, told neighbors she had collapsed suddenly. The local doctor listed the cause as childbirth, though she had not been pregnant. Weeks later, Zona's mother claimed her daughter's ghost appeared to her, night after night. The spirit described how Shue had been cruel, strangled her in a fit of rage, and left her lifeless on the floor. Convinced, the mother demanded authorities exhume Zona's body. To everyone's shock, an autopsy revealed a broken neck. Shue was arrested, tried, and found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment at the state penitentiary, where he died in 1900. Zona's case is unique in U.S. history. It remains the only trial where testimony about a ghost helped secure a conviction. Number 7. The murder of Grace Brown, 1906 USA. Grace Brown, a young factory worker in Cortland, New York, fell in love with Chester Gillette, the wealthy nephew of the factory owner. When Grace became pregnant, she pressured Chester to marry her. Instead, he planned a grim solution. In July 1906, Chester invited Grace on a trip to the Adirondacks. They rented a boat on Big Moose Lake. Once far from shore, Chester struck her with a tennis racket and pushed her overboard. Grace drowned, unable to swim. Chester was arrested soon after, tried, and found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death and executed in the electric chair in 1908 at age 24. The case shocked the nation and inspired Theodore Dreiser's famous novel, An American Tragedy, later adapted into the film A Place in the Sun. Grace's tragic love story endures as a cautionary tale of betrayal and ambition. Number 6. The Smutty Nose Murders, 1873 USA. On a cold March night in 1873, two Norwegian immigrant women, Karen and Anitha Christensen, were brutally murdered on Smutty Nose Island, part of New Hampshire's Isles of Shoals. Their sister Maren survived by hiding all night in the freezing outdoors, listening to the screams of her family. Suspicion fell on Louis Wagner, a fisherman who had once lived with the family. He had financial troubles and was accused of rowing out to the isolated island under cover of darkness to rob them, killing the women in the process. Wagner was arrested, tried, and convicted within months. He maintained his innocence until the end, but the evidence, including his sudden possession of money, convinced the jury. He was hanged in 1875 before a crowd of witnesses. Maren never wavered in her testimony against him, and her story of survival kept the case alive in New England folklore. Number 5. The Amityville Murders, 1974 USA. In November 1974, the quiet suburban town of Amityville, New York, was shaken when 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. shot and killed 6 members of his own family as they slept. His parents, 2 brothers, and 2 sisters all died in their beds from point-blank rifle shots. DeFeo initially claimed the mob was responsible, but he later confessed, saying voices in the house drove him to commit the massacre. He was tried in 1975 and found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences, ensuring he would never be free. DeFeo remained in prison until his death in 2021, at the age of 69. The crime gained further notoriety when a new family moved into the house and reported paranormal activity, inspiring the Amityville horror. But at its core, the case is not about ghosts. It was a cold-blooded family annihilation. Number 4. The Murder of Julia Wallace, 1931 UK. William Wallace, an insurance salesman in Liverpool, received a strange phone call one evening, directing him to a non-existent address for a business meeting. When he returned home later, he found his wife Julia bludgeoned to death in their living room. Suspicion immediately fell on William. Prosecutors argued that he had staged the phone call to create an alibi, then rushed home to kill his wife. He was convicted and sentenced to death by hanging, despite the circumstantial nature of the evidence. Yet upon appeal, the conviction was overturned due to lack of proof, and Wallace was freed. He lived only 2 more years before dying of illness in 1933. Julia's murder remains one of Britain's great unsolved mysteries. Many still debate whether Wallace was a cold, calculating killer or the victim of a cruel setup. We are now moving on to the top 3 of the list. If you have made it this far, please do not forget to like this video and subscribe to Vault of 15. Number 3. The St. Aubin Street Massacre, 1929 USA. On a July morning in Detroit, neighbors discovered a horrifying sight inside the home of faith healer Benny Evangelist. He, his wife, and their 4 children had been murdered with an axe. Benny was found seated at his desk, his head nearly severed. The children were butchered in their beds. Police initially suspected rivals in the religious community or someone angered by Benny's bizarre occult practices. Despite a lengthy investigation, No suspect was ever brought to trial. One man was arrested and questioned, but evidence was too thin to hold him. The murders remain unsolved. Benny's writings, filled with visions and strange prophecies, only deepened the mystery. No one was convicted, no punishment was ever delivered. The massacre stands as one of Detroit's most brutal unsolved crimes, a family wiped out and a killer who vanished without a trace. Number 2, the murder of Pearl Bryan, 1896, USA. Pearl Bryan, a 22-year-old from Indiana, was 5 months pregnant when she left home to meet her lover, dental student Scott Jackson, in Kentucky. Days later, her headless body was discovered in a field near Fort Thomas. Her feet still wore her fashionable shoes, which helped identify her. Jackson and his accomplice, Alonzo Walling, were quickly arrested. Witnesses testified they had plotted to perform an abortion on Pearl, but instead murdered her. The brutality of her decapitation horrified the public, and when the men refused to reveal where they had hidden Pearl's head, outrage turned to fury. Both Jackson and Walling were convicted of murder and sentenced to death. They were hanged side by side in 1897 before a crowd of thousands. Pearl's missing head was never found, sparking rumors that it had been used in occult rituals. The gruesome story has since become the basis of ghost legends in Kentucky and Ohio. Number 1, the Black Dahlia murder, 1947, USA. In January 1947, a mother walking with her child in Los Angeles came upon what she first thought was a discarded mannequin. It was the body of 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, a would-be actress. She had been gruesomely mutilated, her body severed in half at the waist, drained of blood, and posed on the ground. Her mouth had been slashed into a ghastly Glasgow smile. Police questioned dozens of suspects, including doctors, actors, and servicemen. At least 60 confessions were given, all false. The most serious suspects included Dr. George Hodel, a physician with disturbing ties to sadistic practices, but prosecutors never had enough evidence to bring charges. Elizabeth Short's murder remains unsolved. No one was convicted and no punishment was ever given. The brutality of the crime, combined with her tragic status as a young woman chasing Hollywood dreams, cemented the case as one of America's darkest unsolved murders. We hope you found this episode as unsettling as it was fascinating. From infamous trials to unsolved mysteries, these cases prove that truth is often stranger and darker than fiction. Thank you for watching, and remember, truth is in the list.